So today we're going to be talking about termination and referrals, and I have two LCSW test prep questions for you surrounding this particular information. Hello and welcome back to my channel, Mental Health with Melissa. I'm Melissa. If you're new here, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button for more content like this. I post new videos every single Sunday and Wednesday, and subscribing to my channel really helps me get mental health information out there to our communities of color and tons of free LCSW test prep. I am an LCSW therapist, clinical supervisor, and PhD psychology research student. I'm currently creating a new LCSW exam study prep program, and so if you're interested in that, please enter your information at the link below because I am accumulating some of your guys' contact information so I can send it out to those that may be interested. I'm going to be coming up with it in the next few months in the new year, so I won't have it for a while, so apologies if you're going to be taking your exams soon, like within the next few weeks, because I will not have it out by then, but I still do have hundreds of LCSW test prep videos with LCSW test prep questions on my channel, so definitely take a look at those. If you are a mental health or behavioral health provider and you're interested in more support from this fellow network, I have a mental health provider support group that is weekly, so please reach out to me if you're interested. You can comment in the comment section below or reach out to me on one of my platforms on my website. So today we're going to be talking about termination and referrals, and I have two LCSW test prep questions for you surrounding this particular information. So termination and referrals are things that come up in the therapeutic process. When you become a therapist, or if you are a therapist, you know that things come to an end, whether it be by the therapeutic relationship ending due to meeting goals, or because the client needs to be referred. There are plenty of reasons, so we're going to take a look in detail. So first, I wanted to give you a kind of clinical definition of what termination is in the therapeutic process. So termination is the term typically used when referring to the end of a psychotherapy relationship. It may occur as an anticipated and well-articulated treatment plan that indicates the next phase of psychotherapy process, or it may occur precipitously or by surprise. So this actually really captures in a nutshell what termination in psychotherapy is, because we really want to plan and put it out there, let our client know that there is a possibility that the therapeutic relationship may come to an end when the treatment goals are met, or if there's another service that you can't provide to the client. And so we really want to make sure that we're able to do that. And so before we get into the actual test prep question, I wanted to go over some strategies for ethical termination of psychotherapy. So there's a couple of things that I want to address. So first, termination should be discussed from the beginning of the actual therapeutic process in informed consent. So if you're a social worker, you probably have heard the term, especially if you're a medical social worker, or even if you're not a social worker and you work in the healthcare field, you've probably heard the term discharge planning begins at admission. And basically what that means is we want to plan for the end of something at the very beginning, because it's always a part of the moving kind of role that we have. And so in the informed consent, which I have a test prep question and information about test prep in on my channel in another video, and I'll link it below. You're going to want to definitely put down information, if you're able to, in the informed consent about termination, and that the length of treatment is open-ended and can be determined by progress made toward treatment goals, and there's very different circumstances than the case where treatment is limited to specific number of sessions. So For example, there's limitation on clients' insurance coverage or in the instance of brief or time-limited psychotherapy. So depending on what services you provide and how open-ended or how structured your interventions are, you're going to want to really make sure that that is in your informed consent with your client. And in addition to that, you're going to want to reach agreement on goals of treatment and the criteria for successful completion of treatment with your client. So again, that can be discussed during your initial session or placed in your informed consent. Excuse me. And then on top of that, considering and preparing for possible psychotherapist initiated interruptions to treatment is going to be important too, because, life comes up. So as a therapist, you may have to take extended leave for whatever reason, whether it be bereavement, paternal or maternal leave, sick leave, whatever the case may be. And so while those may be things that may come up out of the blue and you can't necessarily prepare for, you still want to give the disclaimer that it is a possibility, and that referrals will need to be made during that time. So let's go ahead and get into the termination LCSW test prep question. Okay, so this is a pretty brief and straight to the point question. Termination would likely be appropriate in all of the following situations, except, so here is a key word here, because this is telling us that all of the options that are going to be listed are going to most likely be appropriate for termination, except one. So let's go through and see what that one may be. Okay, option A, the client is moving out of the country. Okay, so I'm a licensed provider in the state of California, and in the state of California, the Board of Behavioral Sciences prohibits a therapy session happening without both parties, so the therapist and the client, being in the state of California. So while we can still do telehealth and virtual services, both the therapist and the client still must be in California. So if the client, for example, moves to New York, the therapist cannot continue to be the therapist for the client because they're in different states. Now, every state has their different regulations. I think there are some states that allow for clients to be in a different state or therapists to be in a different state from one another. However, you're going to have to defer to your state guidelines. I don't know of any state that really allows therapeutic services for telehealth while the client is out of the country and no longer in the United States. So because of that, this probably would be an appropriate termination. Again, because the client, there's several different things that could be going on here when a client moves out of the United States, out of the country. First of all, the therapist may not be well versed in any of the mental health or crisis resources available in that country that the client lives in. So if something were to happen and the client endorses some sort of crisis like suicidal ideation, for example, or homicidal ideation, the therapist is not going to know likely who or what the emergency services contact line is. So it wouldn't be within the best interests for that. So because of that, this is not the answer. Option B, the client states they are not ready to talk about their past. Okay, so if a client is stating that they're not ready to talk about their past, what would this tell us? Or what would you do as a therapist if or a client that you've been seeing lets you know that they just don't want to talk about their past when you ask them a question about their past? You would want to know why, right? You would want to know why this is a trigger for them, or if it's not a trigger for them, what is the barrier to them telling you? So let's look at option C before we cross out and do the process of elimination, because this is telling us that there's something else there. And while it may be certainly, a reason such as the client just has already processed that part and, doesn't want to go back to that past, we still don't know that. They haven't told us. They're just refusing to tell us or refusing to talk about it. So what that does let us know is there might be something else there. So it doesn't seem like it would be appropriate to terminate if they tell us that they're not ready about revisiting their past. Option C, the client and therapist acknowledge the client has reached their treatment goals. So kind of like we were talking about earlier, those treatment goals that you talk about in the informed consent about what these goals are. If you both have agreed that there's been progress in it and there's been evidence to show for that, then that would likely be appropriate for termination. So we're going to cross that out. Option D, the client processes the changes and improvements they have made. So along with option C, it sounds like here the client is really processing the improvements that they've had, that they've really been able to progress, and they see that. So that would likely be an indication that they're ready to move forward with termination. So we're going to cross that out, which leaves us with option B. Again, the client states they are not ready to talk about their past. So this may likely mean that there's more to kind of unfold and more questions to be asked. And so it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate to say, okay, well, if you're not ready, let's move on to termination. That would be kind of like a step of avoidance. And so we don't want to mirror avoidance. We want to really clearly show that we're interested to know what happened about their past that's making them ambivalent to sharing. Okay, our next question that we're going to be taking a look on is referrals. So in therapy, I wanted to again come up with a referral or find and identify the referral clinical definition for you. And it's when counselors or therapists make recommendations of where a client might seek treatment. This may happen if counselors or therapists cannot accept the client for some appropriate reason, or if some treatment has occurred, the client needs have changed. So let's go ahead and jump right into the test prep question. Pause here, read it, choose the answer that you think is appropriate, and then play and compare it to my answer so you can test where you're at. You are a behavioral therapist in private practice and see a client for your 4th session together. Okay, so it's the 4th session. It doesn't sound like you've been together for that long. If you're meeting weekly, it's just been about 1 month. So you form some rapport, but you haven't been together for a significant amount of time. Who initially started seeing you for symptoms of depression, requesting CBT services. So if you're a behavioral therapist, then you're likely providing CBT services. By this session, so we're talking about the 4th session, you note that the client has been exhibiting symptoms or criteria for borderline personality disorder, or BPD. But you do not have any experience treating BPD and rule out the diagnosis of depression. What is the best option in this case? So rule out, if you're not familiar with that term, means basically in a nutshell that you have assessed that depression is not the diagnosis. You've assessed that although they have diagnose themselves or state they have symptoms of depression, you as a clinical provider have met with them, have assessed them, asked them the appropriate questions, and have found that that's not an appropriate diagnosis, so you're ruling it out. But instead, what you have found is that they have symptoms and criteria that exhibit borderline personality disorder. So what is the best plan or the best option in this case? So again, with best, this is a key word here in this sort of question because it's saying we want to know what may be the primary option to do in this case. There may be a lot of great answers, but we want to do the first and best sort of intervention. So option A, continue to see the client and treat the depressive symptoms even though they are not currently prevalent. So right away, this is just not a strong answer because like I mentioned, what rule out is, we've already ruled out that depression is not the diagnosis in this case, and so that would not be within the best interest for the client. So we're going to cross that out. This option B, discuss with the client and refer to a specialist who treats borderline personality disorder. So this sounds like a pretty strong answer, but for the process of elimination, let's look at the other options. Option C, join a training for borderline personality disorder so you can treat the client for borderline personality disorder. This would not be appropriate because you don't have the experience yet. While you may be interested in learning more about borderline personality disorder and the interventions for it, just by simply joining a training for it while you have the client is really not going to be helpful, because the client needs mental health treatment now. And so this, who knows how long this is going to take. So this is not the best option. Option D, consult with a colleague who is a borderline personality disorder specialist who does DBT, which is dialectic behavioral therapy, commonly known to treat BPD, and request that the client see both of you simultaneously. Now, while this may be an important thing to do in the future, perhaps when the client, if the client has already established a very long-standing relationship with you and needs additional assistance with another therapist, we see here you haven't really met for that long together yet. Again, this is the 4th session, and generally, as a rule of thumb, we don't like in mental health and in therapy for a client to have multiple therapists, because this can be confusing for the client, because the therapist may be telling the client different things, and then this may overwhelm the client because the client may feel that, you know, they have to explain themselves multiple times to different people. As opposed to just talking to one person and letting them know, checking in with how their week has gone. So as a result, this does not seem like the most appropriate answer. And so option B appears to be the most appropriate answer at this time. And that's going to be discuss with the client and refer to a specialist who treats borderline personality disorder, because you definitely want to have this conversation with the client about what you have kind of assessed and what you recommend. And so referring to a specialist who really knows how to treat this particular diagnosis is probably going to be the most appropriate answer. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a comment in the comment section below if you have any questions. Until next time, managing mental health matters.